In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can easily create chalk lettering designs in Procreate. I'm going to use my Chalk Toolkit brushes, but you can also use the default brushes in Procreate. Download the color palette in the description to follow along. We're going to create this design, which is a cocktail design, and we're going to combine this lettering and illustration together. I'll also give you some chalk lettering tips on the way so you can create your own chalk designs in Procreate. When making this lettering design, I'm not going to cover all the basics in Procreate, so make sure that you have a little bit of basic knowledge of how things work. Let's start with a big canvas size. And fill our canvas with our dark chalk background. On this background, we're going to use lighter tones to create contrast. I'm going to create a quick and easy thumbnail sketch. We're going to keep this design pretty straightforward and simple, so you can also just get started right away. Let's blow this thumbnail sketch up to the size of our canvas, and we're gonna just dive right into the lettering first. I like to use this rough ink marker with these flat ends for block letters and also for script, just because they have these like flat ends that monoline even with a line that it creates, which makes it really easy to do lettering like this. And I like to go in with an eraser of the same brush, just to create even sharper flat ends to my letters. And we're going to add some more details to this lettering later, but I like to create the bigger shapes on my canvas first so I see what the composition is going to look like and where everything fits. When you're creating chalk designs with brushes that have a lot of textures and you want to fill those shapes, you want to make sure to use the same texture so you don't just have smooth colored in shapes. So when you're going to select your shape to color it in, hold your upper pencil for a bit longer and use a threshold to make sure that the entire shape is selected. And when you color in, you don't see open gaps basically within your line and your filling. A Mai Tai cocktail is usually like a yellow and orange, so this is a nice contrast with our light blue letters as well. And we're going to use that flat end marker again, the rough ink marker, for the rest of our letters as well, but in a smaller size. Now that all of our basics are done, we're going to add details and a bit more texture. Firstly, let's use that letter duo brush to create a frame around our design. I usually use this brush for lettering, but it can also be used for creating fun frames, for example. And that really helps to tie all these elements together. You could use the texture grain for example, adding gradients or shading, but in this case we're going to keep it simple and just create an inline on top on a clipping mask. I'm using a clipping mask to basically keep this inline on top of our letter separate, and that makes it easier to make changes to the lettering itself later on. And if you need some more help with these curves, make sure to turn up the stabilization in the pressure and smoothing settings. I find this really helpful when it comes to script lettering just because it is so much easier with a bit more control in your pencil. And let's add some shading to this. This is something that in a handmade chalkboard you would not be able to do, but this is such a nice option to have. And I added these darker tones to the color palette that you can use to create even deeper shadows. And it's very subtle, but it does make such a difference to your design. It just instantly brings everything to life a bit more. And let's add a second color to this glass, to our cocktail. Also on a clipping mask, and then add that other color at the bottom, so you have this nice color gradient. To create chalk designs, you could easily just use white on black, but adding all these different colors, it immediately gives it a lot more life. And using, for example, this more beige in our glass makes that when you do use white, it really stands out for certain things. So for example, for these ice cubes, using this white, and then we're also going to use that for highlights later on, has much more of a contrasting effect. I am bringing the opacity down slightly to make sure I blend in a bit more with our layers. And then we're going to add some details like adding some lime. And we want to make sure it's not just floating on top of our cocktail. So with a layer mask, I am making sure that it looks like it's actually inside of that liquid. And again, layer masks, super important for creating in a non-destructive way. So you're not just erasing parts of your design, but you can actually make changes to this later if you're not happy. And to make this cocktail glass a bit more interesting, lastly, we want to add something like a cocktail pick or a straw. And that's also a great way to bring back a bit more color, like that blue. When you have such a kind of a simple design, you want to make sure that things still feel balanced. So reusing color in multiple ways is a great way to do that. So the blue from that lettering, we're bringing that back in that cocktail glass in a very intentional way. And as you can see with these brushes, we're sticking to a limited amount of brushes. We're not using all of them to basically have some more consistency in this design. Using all of these different textures in my brush set would just be overwhelming. It basically just gives you options, and you can select the brushes that you like to use most. And let's add some bubbles to this glass. We have some space there, so that would look nice. And again, reusing some more color, like that orange. And we're going to add some shading underneath our glass as well. Remember to fill this shape, use the threshold of your selection so that you can fill up the entire shape without leaving any gaps. And then to fill up any remaining space, especially around the lettering, and kind of to set the tone, I'm going to use a stamp brush, like a sort of star sparkle stamp. And using a stamp brush is just a great way to have these little shapes on hand without having to redraw them. It's just, again, a nice way to bring back some of that color. And lastly, I like to use this concrete texture on top of the entire piece to add a bit more chalk texture. You could also put this on top of your background, but using this on top of your entire design and then using blending modes is a nice way to add texture on top of everything. And then set it to overlay, turn the opacity down slightly to change the intensity of this texture. And when I zoom in, you can see what an effect that has. So it kind of just saturates colors. And that's kind of on a chalkboard what you would see as well. It's kind of grainy look. And when you're finished, don't forget to add your signature. And that's it, our design is done. If you followed along, I would love to see the results. I'd love to see what you created. So don't forget to share it with me on Instagram and make sure to tag me. And if you're on Skillshare, you can also check out my chalk lettering class. And in that class, I'm going to give you more tips on how to basically create designs like this with texture. And we're going to make the rest of this cocktail collection together. I hope that this was helpful. I added a link to the brushes in the description. And if you want more updates and Procreate tips, Procreate brushes, don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter. See you soon.